Okay, so we should be live and recording, and this is SJ with Commission Shift, joined by our Executive Director, Virginia Palacios. And we are back to talk about today's open meeting of the Railroad Commission. And so our State Oil and Gas Agency has these roughly monthly open meetings where hundreds of agenda items are discussed and decided on, and at a fairly rapid pace. So we're here to slow it down, talk about some of the highlights that we're tracking and noticing, and the implications for these decisions, and how they affect the rest of us Texans. So I'm going to call this our Halloween episode, Virginia. It's October 28th. It's spooky season. What is haunting you today about the Railroad Commission's open meeting?
The number of zombie wells. It's the zombie well apocalypse. No, I think we talked last month about how the Railroad Commission's orphaned wells list exceeded 10,000 orphan wells for the first time in, I think, over 15 years. It's been a long time. However, Julie and I were just looking at the numbers today. We keep a running spreadsheet with all the year's annual tallies from the annual oil field cleanup report that the Railroad Commission publishes. And something that we've noticed is that since 2022, the Railroad Commission has been calculating the number of orphaned wells differently than it used to in years past. And so if they were using the same formula that they used to use, they would have already hit 10,000 orphaned wells in 2022 or 2023. And so we think they're kind of doing some weird stuff with their orphaned well counts at the end of the year to make it look like they have less orphaned wells than they do. So this problem really is getting worse rapidly. And even though we saw a little bit of movement on the inactive wells issue in the legislative session this year, we need much more drastic measures from the legislature to really get ahead of this problem and prevent groundwater contamination and protect Texas lands. Um, so one of the first items that we were kind of paying attention to on today's open meeting agenda was these operator P5s that are getting revoked. And so the P5 organization report is a form that every operator has to have on file with the commission, simply stating like, who is the person in charge of this company? What's their address? What's their contact information? Who's ultimately responsible if these wells are not being plugged, right? And so if your P5 gets revoked because you have not plugged your inactive wells or gotten plugging extensions, then you can't operate in Texas. And so we tallied up the number of inactive wells that we were expecting based on the agenda items. But one thing we noticed for agenda items 16 to 23 was that the administrative law judge was reading off numbers for each of these operators that were higher than what was even in the Railroad Commission docket before the open meeting today. And so a lot more wells were orphaned to the Railroad Commission today than we were expecting. Yeah, and so so that's not good. The trends are definitely in the wrong direction.
All right, yeah. So there's a discrepancy between the docket and then the numbers today, but these are wells, just to reiterate, that are inactive and non-compliant. Operators couldn't get them compliant in time, and now they're passing onto the orphaned well list, right?
Yes.
So it's now the
Mhm.
state's, the Railroad Commission's responsibility to plug these wells,
Right.
the growing list, right?
Mhm.
Um,
And I'll
and
just
yeah.
explain, non-compliant means that they maybe haven't removed electricity, haven't removed equipment from the site. They either haven't plugged the well or haven't asked for a plugging extension. So there's a bunch of stuff they're required to do to inactive wells, and these operators just didn't do any of it.
All right. So from inactive well to orphaned well, can you talk to us about how you go from orphaned well to zombie well?
Well, a zombie well could also be an inactive well, but we're basically just talking about wells that come back to life. And so they'll start leaking, or sometimes you see these big, showy geyser-like well blowouts. But we're just talking about the wells that have not been plugged that are starting to cause problems.
Right. And so this is kind of related to the executive update that we also heard, where um, during the meeting today, they acknowledged that the Railroad Commission is behind on plugging wells.
Well, actually, sorry, I have
Yeah,
a quick correction there. So we
yeah.
were getting a report back from the executive director of the Railroad Commission, and he was essentially talking about how the Railroad Commission has exceeded their performance measures that are set by the state legislature on a number of items. So he said, the Railroad Commission conducted more inspections this year than they were required to or expected to. They conducted more site cleanup visits than they were expected to, all these things. But one reason why I think he was emphasizing all these other things is because they did not meet their legislative performance measure for plugging wells in this past fiscal year, which ended August 30th, 2025. And so this is the first time in a long time that they have not exceeded their performance measure for orphaned well plugging. And that is a really big deal. It just shows they don't have enough money to keep up with this problem. They're not collecting enough money from the oil and gas industry to be able to plug wells in a timely manner. And the cost of well plugging is going up because of the cost of labor, the cost of cement, and other factors.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and even within that sort of report back, that's significant news. But he also said that permits are still getting approved, right? In two
Yes.
business days. Do you see
Yeah.
that as an imbalance?
I think there's a cascading problem with how fast they process oil and gas drilling permits. And so the legislature sets a performance measure for the Railroad Commission on how fast they think drilling permits should be approved. And the performance measure is an average of 3 days per permit. And so the legislature is basically telling the Railroad Commission, we want this to happen as fast as possible. The problem with that is, I think what you're alluding to, which is we're ending up with a lot of inactive wells and a lot of orphaned wells. Sometimes oil and gas companies are not drilling wells in good faith, actually intending to produce oil or gas. I went to the Waters of West Texas conference in Reeves County a couple weeks ago, and we heard from Laura Briggs, and she told the whole story of how these operators came onto her property. They defrauded investors and had investors thinking that they were drilling legitimate oil wells and they were going to produce all this oil. They would take people out there in buses to take photos with the rigs and all the oil and gas equipment, but they never intended to produce from these wells. And so they ran off with these investors' money. And it happened twice on the same property. So the first wells that were drilled were orphaned. The leases were transferred over to a new operator, and that new operator ran the same scam on that property. And so the first operator, I believe she said, was operating with falsified P5 organization reports and P4. The P4 report is like an environmental compliance report they have to have on file. And those were falsified, and they were still getting drilling permits from the Railroad Commission with falsified reports. And so there's a big problem. We need the Railroad Commission to add additional scrutiny to these drilling permits and to take the time that it needs. I think the other thing we don't see the Railroad Commission thinking about is the other unintended consequences of issuing drilling permits so quickly. In the Permian Basin right now, we have this problem with produced water, right? We have so much produced water coming out of oil and gas wells and being injected underground that we have this overpressuring of the subsurface. And that's happening because the drilling is happening so fast, and there's about 10 barrels of water coming out for every barrel of oil they produce. The ratios vary by well, but that's a general ratio that some people have been reporting for the Permian Basin. And so if things were moving a little more slowly, then we would probably not have as much overpressuring of the subsurface as we have right now.
That does get into some of the public input comments that you were making today, which we could get into a bit more. But also this general concern with, okay, the beginning of the well's life is, we're racing through that and doing as many of those as possible. We're not necessarily thinking as thoughtfully through the end of a well's life as we should, and what that can look like and how that can be more responsibly managed. And then also what you're saying about oil field waste in general. whether that's produced water or waste pits, like the sludge that might wind up in a waste pit, mystery sludge, as we have called it in the past. So that there's also some agenda items pertaining to waste pits as well. Can we maybe overview there was a rulemaking last year. The agenda item this time was about implementing waste pit rules. Um,
Sure.
yeah.
So, yeah, so last year, the Railroad Commission passed a huge rulemaking to update its and modernize its waste pit rules, which apply to both big commercial facilities that take oil and gas sludge from all over and reserve pits that store oil and gas waste on site where the well is drilled. And so today they approved new forms that are related to implementing all that law. And so some of the forms relate to registering registering reserve pits. And then other forms relate to waste hauling and transportation. I'm trying to see, there was these waste pit forms actually showed up on the Railroad Commission meeting agenda last month, but the commissioners chose not to vote on them last month, and no reason was given. There never is a reason given. And so they were voted on today. We heard through the grapevine that oil and gas well operators were trying to get exceptions to the rules built into the waste pit forms. I don't know if that's true yet. We haven't verified this rumor, but the forms were finally approved today. And I'm trying to see, there were a couple of forms in particular that Paul Dubois called out when he was bringing up um, the forms for approval. So that he specifically noted that since the last meeting, revisions were made to Form EP9 and EP10. One of the forms allows an alternative person to sign in case of waste that is delivered to an unintended facility. And so this is interesting. I don't know exactly what it's about, but there was some discussion this year at the Railroad Commission Regulatory Conference about how these forms work and what operators should do if somebody delivers a load to their facility carrying waste that that facility is not allowed to accept. And one of the things the Railroad Commission staff said is, it might be better to just accept the load, mark it on the form to make note of it, make sure the driver knows that they are not allowed to deliver waste to your facility. But it's better than turning away the load and having them dump the waste illegally somewhere. And so there's kind of a tricky situation you can end up in, but it's not the best thing that could happen, but certainly better than seeing the waste dumped in a stream or in a random field somewhere.
Okay, so um, with the waste pit rules, we know from, the work that we did on this in previous months and last year that when they were revising these rules, there was a lot of closed door meetings that were happening with industry before the public even found out that the Railroad Commission was going to update these rules, right? And so there is like a theme of public engagement here that I just wanted to sort of tease out and connect to some of the updates we heard in the meeting, because there is a silver lining, I think, from the
Yeah.
meeting today. Even though we still have questions around this waste pits rule and the revisions to it, can you speak to, I guess, public engagement in general and some of the new developments?
Yeah. So, as you were discussing, in 2022, we found out the Railroad Commission was working behind closed doors with waste pit companies to rewrite the rules that applied to them. And that was taking place for the better part of 2 years. And so we did get successfully get the public to engage with the commission more on that rule, but they didn't take all of the feedback that we gave. Importantly, with setbacks in particular, we supplied a lot of like scientific information on how far these waste pits should be located away from residences and other sensitive areas, and they didn't really take all of the feedback that we gave them on that. We had asked for in-district public hearings. They didn't do any in-district public hearings, even though this was a major rulemaking, a major rewrite. But we have been asking the Railroad Commission for the past year or so to allow people to give remote public input at Railroad Commission open meetings. And so there's a section of the agenda at the end of every open meeting where the public gets to give 3 minutes of input to the railroad commissioners. But right now you can only do that in person. And there's a lot of places in the state that are very far away from the Railroad Commission. So Reeves County, the county that has the highest number of commercial waste pits in Texas, is like a 7-hour drive from Austin. And so it's not all that practical for people out there to be coming to Austin to give 3 minutes of comments, having to like spend money on hotels, and spend at least 2 days missing work. And so we've been asking the commission to allow people to call in by phone or do video conferencing to give public input. And they've been kind of dragging their feet on it. And today they announced something that is similar to what we were asking, but different. But I think we can safely say this is a step forward in the right direction for public engagement and transparency. And so starting November 12th, the Railroad Commission will start hosting bi-monthly listening sessions with the public. And this will be 90-minute listening sessions every other month. I think they're going to be happening around the middle of the day, like 12 to 1:30, more or less. And they will have a representative from each of the Railroad Commissioners' offices on the call, as well as other expert staff. We talked to the Director of Public Affairs today, and she was telling us that probably the way they'll structure it is they'll allow for 2 minutes per person to give public input if they register before the meeting. And then if there's time after that, people can have make additional comments, ask additional questions, and just take up the rest of the time. And so she also noted that they will have Spanish interpreters available for those calls. And so it's not exactly what we had asked for. We had asked for, being able to do this in front of the commissioners themselves at open meetings, which I think is still important. But these additional listening sessions are a good place for the public to come if they're really having a hard time getting their complaints addressed, or if they're just really struggling with the commission and they want to give feedback or get some help with whatever their issue is. And so we definitely want to encourage people to show up to those listening sessions, make your comments to the commission, ask questions, and hopefully get your concerns dealt with.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for also explaining that, some of the differences of what they're offering and what they could still improve on, especially in terms of being heard by the commissioners themselves. But yeah, definitely exciting news and really good news to hear after, yeah, not expecting it today, I would say.
Yeah, we didn't know this was going to happen, but it's actually a surprise.
Yeah. All right, so we've talked about orphaned wells and zombie wells. We've talked about waste pits and mystery sludge and oil field waste in general, and then also the silver lining with the public input update. I don't know if we want to kind of dive into anything else too much this time around. I feel like those are kind of the big items, unless I'm missing any.
I think that's it. Yeah, that was the big stuff today.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll keep everyone posted as we learn more. And as always, we'll be back with the next open meeting. It's happening Tuesday, November 18th. So we'll be doing debriefs and summaries, live tweets around that time too. And we always try to field questions as best we can. You can engage with us on our social media or our website at commissionshift.org. And Virginia, thank you so much for joining us today for this quick debrief of the open meeting.
Thanks, SJ.
See ya.
Take care.